Hi everybody and welcome back to my channel. It's Russell with Ink and Paper Blog. Long time no talk. I'm sorry about that. It's just been one of those weeks, as you guys may know, this was a holiday week in the US. So work was crazy for 3 days. And then Wednesday night was crazy because you're getting ready for people to come over Thursday. Now, I know some people had today off. I did not. So I was back at work today, and with juggling all of that, I wasn't able to make any videos. So I'm sorry. I've missed you guys. I hope you are all doing well. I hope if you did have a long weekend that you were able to get a lot of reading in. And I am super glad to be here today to do the first part of my November wrap-up. Coming to you a little bit late. But I am super excited because I have had a fantastic reading month. I've read some amazing books, and this is only half of the ones that I've read so far. And there's a lot of them I want to tell you guys about, and I want them to be on your TBR as well. So as always, get out your pen, get out your paper, get out your Goodreads, get out however you organize yourself when it comes to adding to your TBR, because I have a lot of really amazing books to tell you about. And we're going to get started with the book that I read sort of as my contribution to being part of Nonfiction November, because you guys know I don't read a lot of nonfiction, but I definitely wanted to jump in and, you know, do something. And I had some nonfiction on my TBR. And the first book I read this month was The Real Lolita by Sarah Weinman. And this is the kidnapping of Sally Horner and the novel that scandalized the world. Now, I've talked about this book a couple times on my channel. This was one of the big buzz books at Book Expo this year. Sarah Weinman is really taking the story of Sally Horner, who was a young girl who was kidnapped when I want to say she was 9 or 10. And she is kidnapped by a man, and he basically just runs across the country with her. And she is abused physically, she's abused mentally, and she is not rescued until she gets to California. And then in also sort of tandem, she's looking into the connection to the novel Lolita with Nabokov. There is even mention of Sally Horner in Nabokov's Lolita. It's very brief, it's like a sentence. So she's sort of looking at this, does this real life story, did it inform the novel Lolita? And I will let you guys to determine whether or not it did. I felt like Sarah Weinman can really write. She's engaging. She has a very great tone for narrative nonfiction. And I think the story of Sally Horner in the beginning of the book, where we sort of learn about her as a young child and how and where she got to being kidnapped, was very compelling. I loved the literary criticism sort of aspect, the investigation into Nabokov's history of writing about the topic of Lolita. And I actually really liked those sections more. Anything about Lolita and Nabokov and his wife, I definitely very much appreciated. The problem I had is that not much is known about what happened to Sally Horner while she was kidnapped. So there's a lot of hypothetical sort of discussions of this could have been what's going on, piecing together little information to try to create a narrative, which to me sort of leads to the idea that, is there any connection between these two events? If we don't know anything about Sally Horner, how would Nabokov have used that as sort of the idea? And also, it appears that he had sort of been percolating on this idea for longer than Sally Horner. But I definitely think it's an interesting book. I think that she does a lot of really good things. It just, the sort of the thesis of it didn't quite get proven. Does that make sense? And so to me, it was okay. It wasn't my favorite read of the month, but I definitely will read more by Sarah Weinman. I think she's very, very talented. So that's The Real Lolita, The Kidnapping of Sally Horner, and the novel that scandalized the world by Sarah Weinman. Now we get into my bread and butter, some fiction and some amazing, amazing books, okay? So the first one I'm going to tell you about is The Silence of the Girls by Pat Barker. Sorry, that's a weird glare cover right there. This was my Book of the Month Club book a month or two ago now. This is a retelling of the Iliad from the point of view of the women who are used and more or less traded as the prizes after battles are won. Now, the start of the book is the Greek army and Achilles attacking a city and defeating it. And this is the story of the queen who is used as a reward, and she becomes more or less Achilles' prize. Now, he uses her in every way you can imagine. She's a slave. She serves him food sexually. And it is all told from her point of view, which is powerful. It's very well done. And she meets other women who were at different stations in her community, in her world as a Trojan woman, that are now all sort of equaled out, and they're all prize slave women to the Greek army. We meet many characters. We meet Achilles, we meet Patroclus, we meet Odysseus, we meet Agamemnon, and Pat Barker does an amazing job. She's great at creating sort of the whole atmosphere. And the first half of the book is really from the point of view of only of the woman. And I apologize, her name is something that I would not be able to say, and I don't want to butcher it. But it's from her point of view. And then in the second section, Achilles starts to have a few moments where he speaks. But overall, this is really the story of the women and the effects that war had on them. And it's universal. This is about the Trojan War, but I have a feeling that there are so many comparisons that can be made to modern war. This was just shortlisted for the Costa Book of the Year Award, and it is worth every minute, every second. You guys read The Silence of the Girls by Pat Barker. It is amazing, amazing. The next book I'm going to tell you about, I'm a little bit late to the party, and that is The Tidal Zone by Sarah Moss. I've had this book on my shelf since everyone was talking about it on BookTube, and I just for some reason never picked it up, and sad for me because it is freaking brilliant. 5-star read across the board. This is the story of a family, a mother, a father, and 2 daughters. The father is a stay-at-home father. He is also a professor of art history, architectural history. The wife is a doctor. Their oldest daughter one day is found at school, passed out, and more or less is brought back from the dead. And it turns, she goes into the hospital. And this is a book that deals with how a family, parents, this father specifically, because it's told from his point of view, deal with the mortality of their children and how that affects not only the way that you interact with your child, but also your other children for concerns. This book deals with a congenitive, that's not the right word, a condition that is genetic. So there's concerns if the younger daughter is also going to get the same thing. There is a discussion regarding the husband and wife, their relationship, the distance this causes. The wife is a successful doctor. It also has a lot of conversation regarding the medical system in the UK. This book is brilliant. If you are a fan of stoner, if you are a fan of any sort of those quiet novels, simple plot, character-driven, thought-provoking, this is a book for you. I ordered mine on Book Depository, so I highly recommend you go ahead and do that. Also, I want to just take a moment. So this cover, this beautiful cover, this is a painting. This is not a photograph. This is a painting. This artist in his own right, this is brilliant. So this is The Tidal Zone by Sarah Moss. If you haven't read it, do it now. I wound up buying everything that Sarah Moss has written because of this book. There you go. That's a resounding Russell thumbs up. There you go. Okay, so the next book I read was also on my shelf for a long time. I got it in a Page Habit box a year ago, and it's Here in Berlin by Cristina Garcia, out from Counterpoint. I just want to say, I don't know why I didn't read this. I got it. I thought it sounded interesting, put it on my shelf. But when I started reading it, I read it in a day and a half. It's really, really good. If you're a fan of interconnected short stories, if you're a fan of Oliver Kittrich, if you're a fan of Anthony Marra's second book, The Czar and Techno, I can't ever remember the name of that full title. But this is the story of a woman who goes back to Berlin, and she used to live in Berlin, and she goes and she starts to interview people. And that is what these are. These are snippet interviews about people. A lot of it has to do with World War II. All different perspectives on the German Nazi situation, people in different sort of perspectives about World War II in Germany. In the same time, you'll get sort of the interspersed points of view of our narrator, who is there with her best friend, and she gives you insights into who she is, why she's there. She has a relationship with her daughter, who later in the book comes to visit. It is so good. It's a little hard to explain because it's really a bunch of different perspectives on people who are now way past World War II, but reflecting back on it. I really enjoyed it. I think that it is a book that just flew under the radar, and the paperback is gorgeous, so you should go get it if that is up your speed. And this is Here in Berlin by Cristina Garcia. Interconnected short stories, if that's your jam, I highly recommend this one. The next book, I'm so excited that I finally got to read this, and that's Bury What We Cannot Take by Kirstin Chen. I've now met Kirstin a couple of times. This actually, she signed my copy of it. Isn't it beautiful? Isn't she do? She's so sweet. This is set in China. This is the story of a family. So the mother and the grandmother live in China with the daughter and son. The son is older, the daughter is younger. The husband lives in Hong Kong. This is after sort of the Chinese Revolution and communism has taken over. The kids are in school. They come home, very first pages, and they catch the grandmother. Something has happened to Mao's portrait, and it appears that she has struck it with a hammer. Now, the oldest son wants to be part of the regime. He wants to be a good citizen of China, and he is given an application to join into the child's, I can't remember exactly what the term is, but in that application, he turns in that his grandmother has done this to the Mao portrait. What he doesn't know, and what we learn very early on, is that there is a discussion to get the family to Hong Kong, and the mother and grandmother are going to take the children to Hong Kong. They get a letter that says the father is very ill, and they are going to apply for passes to go there. But what happens, because of what the son has done, the family is now under review. And what they are forced to do is leave one of their children behind, and they leave the daughter behind. So the son and the mom and the grandmother go to Hong Kong. The daughter is left in the house in China. Very different stories. The son wants to get back. He wants to be part of the revolution of China. The parents have not seen each other. The father has a different life. There's a lot of dynamic between that. The daughter doesn't really know what's going on. She's very young. I think she's 9. And stuff happens to her. And I don't want to give any away because I think that is very much part of the story. I really enjoyed this. Definitely a bunch of different aspects regarding the culture and the revolution in China, how that affected people. Also, the difference between how Chinese are looked at in Hong Kong versus being in mainland China. I really enjoyed this book. The young girl goes through a lot, and for me, that's where it was a little bit thin in so much as that it sort of was like, oh gosh, no more bad stuff can happen to this young girl. But I was totally bought into her story. San is her name. Loved her. Wanted whatever to happen to her and get her out of where she needed to go. Was totally compelled through this book. I know this book I also feel flew under the radar this year. Highly recommend it. It is also out in paperback. And that's Bury What We Cannot Take by Kirstin Chen. Really great read, you guys. Highly recommend. The next book I read, I don't know how to explain to you. And that's The Third Hotel by Laura Vandenberg. And I want to say, if you are a fan of Fever Dream, sort of what is going on, weird but beautiful but fantastic but compelling, I think this book is for you. This is the story of a woman who is in Cuba for a film festival. So we find out very early that her husband has passed, and he was a PhD in film studies, and he focused on horror film. And there is about to be a premiere at this Cuban film festival of a zombie horror film, the first one to come out of Cuba. And so she goes down there to see this film in remembrance of her husband. And what happens is one day she's outside of the theater and she turns around and she sees her husband. And he's supposed to be dead. And she turns into this following him, what has happened, investigating. Sort of, it's very dark, it's very crazy. There are like parts where you don't really know what's going on, but it's so compelling and she is so interesting. And you are trying to figure out the puzzle as she is trying to figure out the puzzle. And I will say the ending, I'm not sure what happens, but I want to talk about this book with everybody who's read it. I really think if you're a fan of Fever Dreams, this is going to be a book that you will absolutely love. Laura Vandenberg can write a sentence, she can write a scene, she can put you on the edge of her seat. It's really, really good. But in the same time, I don't know exactly how to explain it. But I loved it. So that's The Third Hotel by Laura Vandenberg. Definitely read it. And then shoot me an email because we need to talk about it. Okay, the last novel I'm going to talk to you about is the very lovely Whiskey and Ribbons by Leesa Cross Smith. This book is just heart-wrenching. And this is the story of three people. We have Evie, who is married to Emin. I'm saying his name wrong. And Emin's brother is Dalton. Okay. At the very start, we find out that Emin has been shot and killed. He was a police officer on duty. His wife, who is Evie, is our first narrator, and she has just had a baby. She was pregnant when he died. The book rotates between the perspective of Evie and Dalton in the present time and their ever-changing, ever-developing relationship. Also, we have, and their part basically takes place over a weekend where they are snowed into a house where her son is actually being watched by her grandparents. And it focuses on their relationship, not only with each other, but also with the brother/husband. Also, the husband has a section where he is narrating, and he is telling the story of how we got to this point. We learn about his relationship to his brother, who was adopted into his family. We learn about his relationship with his wife and how they became together. And then we also learn about what he plans to do once his son is born. There is so much dynamic. The family part of it is fantastic. It's also a romance in two parts. We have a relationship between the husband and wife, Evie and Amon, who we get to see that budding sort of love and relationship. And then we also have a relationship between Dalton and Evie after, Evangeline is her full name, after the death of her husband that is evolving as well and has just beautiful sort of grief and love and need. And it's just so good, you guys. Highly recommend Whiskey and Ribbons by Leesa Cross Smith. I really enjoyed it. And yeah, and it also takes place in, I want to say Louisville, which is not a city that gets a lot of novels that are set in it. And so it was nice to get sort of that inner-sized big city, also that deals with a lot of really current issues. She paints a beautiful portrait of every part of this relationship. I highly recommend Whiskey and Ribbons by Leesa Cross Smith. Last but not least is a children's book, which you will not be surprised to see. Franklin and Luna Go to the Moon by Jen Campbell, illustrated by Katie Harnett, back here on my channel. Now, Franklin and Luna and their Flying Bookshop was out last year. It was fantastic. I gave it to every young reader in my life. And this year they will be getting this amazing book. The art is fantastic. This is about Franklin's search for who he is and where he comes from. And this is about friendship. And I just, oh gosh, you guys, how good is this art? How good is this art? The story is sweet and compelling, and I highly recommend it for those young readers in your life if you have a book, looking for someone and you need a book to give them. So that's Franklin and Luna Go to the Moon by Jen Campbell and Katie Harnett. Highly recommend. Definitely, I just loved it. And that is a very long November wrap-up part 1. Almost 20 minutes, going to be 20 minutes by the time I'm done. As always, if you are back on my channel, thank you so much. I appreciate it. You guys know you are the reason I do this. If you are new to my channel, I hope a bunch of these books wind up on your TBR and you come back again. And as always, until next time, happy reading, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye!